Good morning, good evening, whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you might be doing. We wish to welcome you to the Silverlight Show. The Silverlight shines to illuminate that which lies hidden in darkness. For those of you tuning in today, we welcome you in. Taking a break from our Bible readings, I want to tell you how the Vikings caused World War II, at least using 21st century logic. The Vikings. I'm sure many of you are familiar with them. Those raiding people with the horns on their helmets. Although archaeological evidence says that nobody ever used horns on their helmets, especially not the Vikings. But they were prone to wandering around, finding places to raid, settling down there, and basically going where no man had gone before. The Vikings even made their way to North America and established two colonies, one in Newfoundland, which is confirmed, and another one they're still not 100% sure of, somewhere in New England. And as we know, North America was involved in World War I. The Vikings actually did fight the First Nations, and apparently it didn't go very well for the Vikings. They were more prone to acts of brutality where they could come in and show up and people would surrender, or if they surrendered, they would die on the spot. If they ran away, they would die tired, because Vikings needed to have that name for themselves. At home, they were farmers, but there was a season for them to go about and kind of prove themselves as warriors. Let's look at their impact on history. Charlemagne the Great, who has actually been canonized and is a saint in some circles. He was the first Holy Roman Emperor. While he wasn't busy fighting the Moors down in Tours, I never realized how that rhymed until I said it. But yeah, he was fighting big battles and beating the Muslim people back. He was sitting at home and trying to figure out ways to stop the Vikings. And basically what he did is build a bunch of bridges so that when the Viking longships came up, he'd be able to slow them down or trap them between bridges, and that was his strategy. But as we can see, Charlemagne was obsessed with finding a way to keep Vikings out of his country. When Charlemagne passed away, his territory was divided amongst his sons. And eventually, his capital, Aachen, Aachaen, became part of Germany. So you have one of the major players already set up. The other part of his kingdom became France. We'll get back to them in a moment. The Polish were no strangers to Viking incursions. As a matter of fact, there's a reconstructed Viking settlement in Poland to this very day to honor that piece of heritage. The Vikings went raiding as far down as Kiev and Constantinople. And in Kiev, they were known as the Kievan Rus, as in Russians. Russians, the modern Russians, come from the Vikings. So we got Germany, we got France, we got Poland, we got Russia. Almost all the ingredients that we need to make up the combatants in World War II, aside from a few allies here and there. But if you want to throw it in, Charlemagne was allied with with Italy, so there was that alliance there. But what about Britain? Well, in the 1050s and 1060s, there was a succession crisis in Britain. And King Harold was defending against William the Bastard of the Normans. Now, who are the Normans? Normans were some people that settled in France. And Norman were Norwegians, Norsemen. And indeed, the French were not afraid to name places after them. Normandy, for example. So once again, we see this Viking influence, which is intensely felt in England. You have that finalizing the deal, but before that, there's what was called Danelaw, which were countries parts of the country that were recognized as belonging to the Vikings. So you have England, France, 2 or 3 times having given in to the Vikings. You got Germany basically being formed in response to the Vikings, Poland, who has Viking overlords, and Russia, who basically are the Vikings with a slightly different name. World War II has all those people in contact with each other. Germany invades Poland. Russia also invades Poland. So there we are. Vikings fighting Vikings. And then when France gets involved, once again, you got this Germanic people fighting a Viking people. Because the Normans never really went away. The English, of course, with their guarantee of Belgian neutrality, had to get involved as well. And wound up sticking the war out and getting the North American people involved because they had Canada and the United States was allied to them. And there's plenty of Dutch people in that area. Now, Dutch people are nominally German, but they also have a lot of Norse blood in them. Everything gets mixed together. As Germany likes to say, it calls itself Deutschland. Not Germany, Deutschland. Dutchland. So over the influence of 1,500 years, we see the same wars being fought by the same groups of people. The leaders' names change, but it's the same group of elites. And Europe is the land of Northern Europe is the land of the Vikings. Southern Europe still has a strong Roman influence. They still talk about Latin culture, and that comes out to Latin America. It has all sorts of that. But the north of Europe definitely belongs to the Vikings. What they say pretty much goes. Norway doesn't seem to be a very imposing country these days. People take it as pretty peaceful. And indeed, most countries seem to reach a point where they're happy to have peace for 1,000 years instead of fighting it out. That's something I mean to really look into one day. These massive migrations that we're taught about seem more to be the immigration of a few rulers and their buddies. For example, King Richard of England, the famous Richard who went on crusade, spent less than a couple months in England. The rest of his life he spent anywhere else. He didn't really care about England, but it was his heritage from his Viking ancestor, William the Bastard, who you might know as William the Conqueror or King William. And Richard, who has firm Viking Norman blood inside of him, is the one that restored the Holy Land. At least most of it. Kept the Templars there, and he kept the influence of that Viking name for so long that in 1921, when the British and the French, quote, liberated, end quote, the Holy Land, a French officer, French, Norman, put his pistol on Saladin's grave and said, "Saladin, we have returned." The Vikings don't forget. They just wait for their opportunities. And again, like I said, right now we're in a peaceful period, but the Europeans still have that, the Northern Europeans still have that Viking blood in them. They're cold, they're calculating. They will find a way to win. Now, this is not to disrespect any of the many countries on this planet, but it can't be denied that Spain, France, Germany, and England, and Russia have had a wildly disproportionate impact on the world. And it all goes back to this Norman original influence. Now I ask you, with everything I've just outlined, how far back are we willing to go? That's 1,500 years and possibly more. The Vikings also found Iceland in about the 4th century, so we're going back 1600 years with their influence. How far back do we want to go to find a cause for something that happened much more recently? Because you can draw a line between any two events, and you can connect any dots that you like. I don't seriously blame the Normans for World War II. Richard had no intention of, doing anything other than liberating Palestine, going on crusade, and whatever his relationship with the French Prince King was, I don't know. But how far back do you want to go? Where is the limit? Because I can still go further if I really want. Is this an exercise in ridiculousness? Partially. But there are some people in some situations that are willing to bear grudges that long. They're willing to be upset for that long. They are willing to sit back and say, your ancestor killed my ancestor, and that bothers me because of this, that, the other thing. Well, how far back do you want to take it? This is how blood feuds begin, and this is how world wars start. I'm sure the Vikings had no idea that they would be responsible one day for nuclear bombs falling on Japan, because they had no ideas about nuclear bombs or Japan. But the fact is, you can trace that link. So remember what you do today, because in 1,000 years, just maybe, someone's going to remember you. We wish to thank you for joining us on the Silverlight Show today. If you enjoyed this show, please like, share, subscribe. Don't forget to buy the books down in the comments. Every book goes directly to supporting this show, and it's a nice thing to do for somebody. But most importantly, we hope you have a fantastic day.